first of all, thank you so much for your service. Your story is also very harrowing, very intimate, and I appreciate you for sharing it with me. It's a very fascinating read.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
So yeah, can you just tell the it's gonna be going on our YouTube channel. Just tell like our listeners a little about yourself, what you're working on now, like anything they can listen to after this.
Yeah, sure. So my background is I served in the Army National Guard for about 6 years. During that time, I went on a deployment to Afghanistan in 2010. During that deployment, my brother was also deployed to Afghanistan, where he was tragically killed. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of different issues that go along with that. You know, not only just the fact that I was in combat, but also the grief of losing a brother, and you know, there's a lot of things that went along with that. But after coming home, it felt like I didn't have a sense of purpose anymore, and so over time I decided to start a podcast, the Drive On podcast, which the goal of that podcast is to give hope to service members who maybe feel like they're about to give up hope on themselves. And you know, I interview other veterans who have their own inspirational stories to tell. Maybe they came from a dark place, they're struggling with PTSD or depression or substance abuse or homelessness or any number of issues.
Mhm.
And they found a way through those issues and came out better off for it. And so, you know, when other people who are struggling with something hear a story like that, they very often will you know, say, hey, you know, at least I'm not alone. And sometimes that's all you need. And that's really kind of the goal of the podcast. And we also talk to providers of services to veterans. There's nonprofits and other organizations out there who are doing great things for veterans, and a lot of times these organizations are just not very well known. And so by talking about these organizations, it gives the veterans who are out there thinking that they tried everything, they're giving them another shot at hope, you know, and giving them that one more thing that they could try.
That's really awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I hope this interview and I hope the podcast and the book as well just help people that are coming back from serving overseas and just helping them, like, you know, acclimate back to normal life, like you said.
Right.
So yeah, what drew you to writing Surviving Son? Was it like service members that you served with that told you that maybe you should write something about your time there, or how did it come about exactly?
You know, when I first started writing what eventually became this book, it was really just me journaling back when I first got back from Afghanistan. It was just me writing down uh, places and events and things that I experienced and things that I was feeling and going through at the time. And really, it was just so that when my kids got older, I knew that they would probably have questions about what I did in the war and what happened to their uncle and things along those lines. And I knew that over time your memory starts to fade and your mind plays tricks on you, and I didn't want that to happen. I wanted to give them the real information about, okay, this is what actually happened. And so I wrote down as much as I could remember, and as time went on, I was writing down more and more, and eventually I said, you know what, this probably should be a book. You know, there is a story here that I think would be not only just interesting for my kids to read, and they were the primary influence for me to write this, but you know, also for other people, for veterans who maybe are struggling in their own ways, and they need to know that, you know, there are healthier ways to deal with some of the things that they're struggling with, because I certainly made plenty of mistakes, and I talk about those mistakes in my book and how I changed my trajectory. But also for the people who never served and maybe never knew anyone who served, I think it's important for them to understand some of the things that happened to the service members and the families of the fallen and the communities that they lived in, and understand that they're not just a statistic that you hear about in the news, that they are real people with real backgrounds, with real families who cared about them, and they have a story, and there's something behind all of those, and that's what I wanted to do with this book is to be able to tell my brother's story, because I know, you know, he's not here to tell it, and so I wanted to be able to tell it for him.
It's very, very powerful, very courageous of you to take it upon yourself to do that. What has reception been like so far about the book? I know like it is, came out like a little while back, but like what's reception been like so far from those that served and those that are back here at home?
Yeah, I mean, so far, like you said, the book's only been out for a little over a month now. Came out at the very end of August of 2021, and um, it's gotten great feedback so far. I mean, if you look at the reviews on Amazon, they're all 5-star reviews, so that's obviously a positive thing. But even in private messages to me, people sending me emails or messages in social media, they tell me about how the book was inspiring to them, and it was an eye opener to them, and it taught them something about the service that maybe they didn't realize was something that even goes on. You know, how difficult the struggles could be for service members, and it kind of met that goal of mine of kind of educating people about those stories. And hopefully that gives people more reason to be a little bit more compassionate towards the people who are serving our country.
Gosh, that's really great, really awesome. I hope you get like more 5-star reviews and more publicity for the book, because it's a really, really great tale that you're telling.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So I know obviously you lost your brother. I have 3 brothers myself, so that's obviously very difficult thing to deal with. But what was one of your happiest memories being with Stephen, or either overseas or back home?
Yeah, so I mean, when we were overseas, we never got a chance to see each other. So the last time I saw him was in Indiana, the last day that I was at Camp Atterbury in training, and this sequence of events caused it for my unit to miss our scheduled time at the dinner chow hall, and we. Me and a couple of our guys, we decided to sneak away and just sneak into another unit's time in the chow hall while we were there. And it just so happened to be my brother was in the chow hall. His unit was there at that time.
Right.
And so he sees me walking in, and I have this backpack, this army backpack. We called it assault pack. That it was not much more than just a backpack that you would wear to school, but it's camouflage and got all the bells and whistles that the army gives you. But we were packing up to move to a different location, and so I had everything. And stuff was strapped to the sides of the backpack, and I looked like a homeless person who just had everything that he owned on his back.
Right.
And so my brother sees me walk in, and he calls me over. He's like, "Hey, Scott, come on over, sit with us." And so I did, and he just starts ripping into me and giving me so much crap about how I look. How I look like a homeless person walking into this place. And he was but that's just the type of person he was. And it was all good natured. It wasn't like he was giving me a hard time or anything. It was just him, trying to get under my skin. But he was also the type of person who, if somebody else was to say anything about me, he would jump down their throat, because he's like, well, no, you don't get to do that to my brother. Only I get to do that. And so that's just the kind of person he was. But he always just made everything a good time. And he always was a happy person. He had a great spirit and great energy around him. I talk about another time when we were in Boston, going to a Boston Bruins game, and they were playing the Montreal Canadiens, and the Boston won, and so there was this whole good vibe there, and after the home team wins and everything. And as we're walking out, and if you ever walked out of any professional sports, doesn't matter, hockey, football, baseball, whatever, the sea of people just kind of waddling out towards the exits. Well, we're in this big sea of people, and my brother, he just starts this USA, this chant in the crowd, and he gets the entire crowd to start chanting it, because we just beat a Canadian team, and so there's this whole patriotic American thing going on. And that was just the kind of person he could get a whole crowd of strangers to start chanting something, that they didn't know him from anybody else, and he would just get people to do that. And there was just so many great memories of him and things like that. I write about some of those in the book, but it's just really great to think back at some of the good times with him, and smile and laugh to myself about some of the things that we had done together.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot of funny stories. I know there's one about Canadian bacon as well that I won't spoil for those that haven't read it, but it's a very, very interesting story as well.
Right.
So yeah, as you mentioned, like you put a lot of humor and a lot of like personal like pathos into the story, into the book. I mean, was that intentional? Like, is that part of normally who you are as a person, or is that just like something you want to like offset the seriousness of the story?
Well, I think a little bit of both. I think, first off, I like to joke around. I think I got that from my brother. He always was joking around, and so that kind of rubbed off growing up. And so we'd always joke around together. But I recognize that part of the reason for writing this was so that we could understand who the person is behind this name and this picture that you might see in the newspaper or on the television or something like that, and recognize that there is a personality behind it. And his personality was a funny personality. Like he was just a funny guy.
Mhm.
And I don't mean funny in like a strange or crazy way. I mean, he would just light up the room when he walked in, and everyone just laughed and joked and had a good time around him. And and he and that was just who he was. So, if I wrote about only the sad stuff and only the serious stuff, I wouldn't be doing his story justice. I would only be telling part of the story, and quite frankly, part of the story he wasn't even around for, because he had already passed during the sad stuff. And so, the funny stuff is what gives life to the story and gives meaning to who he was.
Very true. Yeah, that's very good of you to do that. Like it definitely helps you get a whole sense of who he was as a person, for sure.
Right.
Are there any like transferable or like personal skills that you gained your time in service that they brought back with you back home?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, there's so many things that you learn in the military service, and for anyone who hasn't served, maybe you can't appreciate it quite as well as someone who has served. But
Mm.
there are things like attention to detail, and making sure that things are done the right way, correctly, because in the military, if you don't have that attention to detail, literally lives are on the line, and someone could get injured or killed if you aren't paying that close attention. And there are other lessons like commitment and the courage that it takes to do something, and the resiliency to do something. Like, for example, when my brother was killed, I found out that he had passed away, and minutes later I was thrown into a firefight. And I read about this in the book, so I won't go into too much detail about it, but the point of that is that I had to be able to kind of segment in my own mind the personal issues that I was going through, the grief and the everything that I was feeling emotionally. I had to put that aside and literally and figuratively put the army hat back on and go get back into the fight and lead my soldiers who were relying on me to lead them, so that not I didn't want my parents getting another knock on the door saying that another one of your kids was killed, but I also didn't want any of my guys, any of my soldiers, to get injured or killed because I wasn't there mentally. And
Mhm.
so, I've taken those lessons and I've taken them into my own life. And I try to impart some of those lessons on my kids, not to panic when there's a bee flying near your head. Take it for what it is, and
Mhm.
recognize that if you just leave the bee alone, it's probably just going to leave you alone and fly away and find a flower, because that's really what it's looking for. And
Yeah.
try to think and not panic and not get overwhelmed with a situation. And so, I try to take some of those lessons away. But there's even more practical things too. I mean, we had medical training in the military. I was an infantryman, and so a lot of times we are the frontline medical providers for people
Mhm.
who might get in a bad situation.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we learned was how to clear an airway, excuse me, clear an airway if someone's choking. And a few years ago, my own son, he started choking on an apple slice, and I went straight into army mode, even though I was long out of the army at that point. But I fell back on that training, and I was able to take that and apply what I learned and clear his airway so that he could continue breathing. And if I hadn't had that skill, it might have turned out in a much different situation for him. So I'm really grateful for all of the experiences that I had while serving in the military.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear your son is okay. Like about the apple slice, it's really that's big. It's pretty crazy. Yeah. Uh, I know since you're like in like just coming out of the pandemic right now. Do you know there's like any like I don't know like any days or any nights where like it gets a little too hectic or too much for you because of just not being able to connect with people as much or not be doing stuff virtually instead of in person? Like, does it get you too much or how do you feel? How do you deal with it all?
It's yeah, it's kind of interesting that one of the things, myself included, but people with PTSD uh, who are struggling with some of the issues that come out of it. One of the things that they will do, and again, myself included, is they'll isolate themselves, and they won't go out in crowds or big public gatherings or things like that. So one of the strange things was when this all the lockdowns and this whole thing started with the pandemic last year. I looked around and everyone seemed like they were panicking, and I was like, should I be acting any differently right now? Because this is kind of how I just normally am. I usually don't go out to too many places. I just kind of hang out, and I don't go in big crowds anyways. And so when people are talking about 6 feet, I was like, that's it. Like, I usually have way more distance between people, because I just don't do that very often. But it's one of those things that I've recognized in myself, and it's something that I know that I need to work on, because I can't just be a hermit and stay in my house all the time and never leave or whatever. Like there's a whole world of opportunity out there, and so that's something that I've actually been working on getting better at, is going outside of that comfort zone and going out and meeting new people, trying new things, experiencing things. And it's a difficult thing to do, especially for people with PTSD, but it's easier when you have a support network. I have a great family, my wife, my kids, they love going and exploring new places and trying new things. And I think the pandemic and everything being locked down was harder on them than it was for me. But I go out with them to these places that they're experiencing and exploring, and it gets me outside of my comfort zone. And so every step that I take outside of that comfort zone just takes me a little bit closer to that quote unquote kind of normal life where I can go out and enjoy and experience the things that most people take for granted.
For sure, that's really really awesome. I thought it would be like something somehow change your perception of how everything was, but to hear they're even doing better now than probably before is just great.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about Amplify plugins? I was doing some research on you and I saw that come up. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my company, Amplify Plugins, we recently merged with another company who does WordPress and WooCommerce development and support. And my company, Amplify Plugins, we make primarily WooCommerce plugins for the e-commerce world. And so what we do is we design the software that helps increase conversions on your store and make a better customer experience throughout the store. So, so yeah, that's what I've been doing professionally for the last probably 7 or so years is designing the software, and it's really been a fun ride, and it's something that it's challenging, but I enjoy it at the same time.
That's awesome. Is that part of your training, like working with technology and part of like working with emerging stuff like that?
No, well, actually, when I was in the military, I was in the infantry. So we didn't. I mean, we had some technology products, that we would use, but we were mostly the boots on the ground, and so we were the door kickers and the people who are out fighting, on the kind of front lines, if you will. And so I didn't have too much interaction with the technology side of things. But all of this is stuff that I learned on my own. When I was in college back in the early 2000s, my father started a company, and I asked him if there was anything I could do to help him out, because he was starting it on his own. He was a solo founder, and he started this company kind of bootstrapped. and I asked him if there's anything I could do to help out. I didn't really know what I could do, but he said, I need a website. So build me a website. And I said, well, I don't know how to build a website. I've never done that before. So he said, and this is back, in the early days, before the internet was what it is now. But he said, go buy a book and figure it out. And so I did. I bought a book as a $25 textbook on how to code HTML websites. And so I built him a website. And that sort of planted a little seed in my head. And at the time I was in school for accounting, and I ended up graduating with an accounting degree, but I still enjoyed the technology side of things. And I taught myself over time, whether it was, through other books or online tutorials or, eventually YouTube videos and things along those lines, where I just taught myself how to code. And, I just figured it all out on my own. And so completely self-taught on all of that. I never took a college course on how to design software or anything, but I was able to turn it into a business, and it's doing pretty well.
Pretty awesome. Yeah, I can't code for crap, but that's great to hear that you're able to be so successful, something that you just picked up and just learned on your own.
Right.
Thank you so much for your time. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think part of it has to do with that resiliency. When there's something that you want to do, even though it's a hard and challenging thing to do, you figure out a way to do it. And so I think everybody has that in them. And so maybe coding isn't the thing that you are interested in, that you necessarily want to do, but there's something out there that maybe there isn't a college course for, or other, kind of courses to do, but I'm sure you could figure it out. If, maybe you're into, having a beer with friends or whatever, and craft brewing is something that's interesting to you. I'm sure you could figure out how to make your own beer and that type of thing, and make it a hobby of yours, but you figure it out. You don't have to go and take classes to do that. Same thing with maybe playing an instrument or baking or whatever. Like, you might not be a great baker, but if you really were into it, you probably could figure it out. And it would take a lot of failures, and I had plenty of them of my own with learning everything that I did. But all those failures you learn from, and you get better from them, and eventually you become successful. And when we look at successful people, sometimes all we see is the success, but we don't see the late nights and the long hours and the failures that they had along the way. And we want that, but we have to know that it comes with some costs too. So
yeah, definitely taking your interest and just finessing and learning on your own, and just learning from your mistakes is a good way to just find out what you want to do and become successful. That's a very good tip for advice. I appreciate that. So yeah, Surviving Sun, it's a great book, an amazing read. It's on Amazon, available, or you might maybe get your books, right? Like on Goodreads and other places like that.
Yeah, you can check it out there, and Amazon. It's on Kindle format, paperback and hardcover formats on Amazon. So check it out there if you want to pick up a copy. I really appreciate anyone who's taken a look at the book so far, and if you get it and you enjoy it, please leave a review, because that just helps the whole Amazon algorithm and get that book listed higher on some of the searches. So
for sure. Thank you so much for your time, Scott, and thanks again for the book. It's a really good read.
Great. Thank you.
No problem.